It is 10:30 a.m. and I would like to call to order the teleconference meeting of the Finance-Auditing Committee of Thursday, October 21st, 2021. Before we begin, please note this meeting is being recorded. And Madam Secretary, can you please call the roll?
Thank you. We have, starting with Director Cochran.
Here.
Director Grothbull. Absent Director Mastin.
Here.
Director Theriault.
Here.
Vice Chair Fredericks.
Here.
Thank you. Chair Rabbit.
Here.
And President Parr.
Present.
Thank you. Also on the line, we have Director Garbarino, Hill, and Rodoni, although you are not a committee of the whole, but you do have a quorum.
Okay.
I'm going to confirm staff really quickly, make sure that my presenters are here. Dennis O'Mulligan.
Present.
Joe Wire.
Yes.
Thank you. John Eberly.
Yes.
Madeline Chan.
Present.
Thank you. Steve Miller is not on the line. Mona Babauta is not on the line. Jim Swindler, are you still on the line?
Present.
Thank you. And I know Kelly Hopper's not on the line. That confirms staff on the line.
Great. Thank you very much. And once again, to remind everyone to use their phones until after the presentations. Remember to unmute accordingly. And I'll be asking for questions, comments, or concerns after each item. The Secretary or I will call on you accordingly. And before the discussion, we'll ask for any public comment before moving on. And of course, you can follow along with the numbered pages located in the bottom right-hand corner of your meeting packet. So Madam Secretary, with that, can you please introduce the first item?
Thank you, Chair Rabbit. Item 3 is the ratification of previous actions by the Auditor Controller. And that packet of commitments, ratification, and investments is before you and on page 5. Auditor Controller Joseph Wire is available to answer any questions regarding the report since Leslie Murphy is on leave. And I just want to add that I believe Director Snyder just joined, so you have just flipped back over to be a committee of the whole.
Great, perfect. Mr. Wire, do you have something to present? Or are you just here to
No, I'm here to answer any questions if you have any on the report that PFM put forward. But if you would like a presentation, I'm happy to go through it.
No, I think I'll just ask my colleagues if there's any questions, comments, concerns for Mr. Wire on item number 3.
Director Mastin, I do have a couple of questions.
Please go ahead, Director Mastin.
Okay. So I noticed on page 22 that, we bought 4.2 million worth of Amazon. And I'm just wonder if Amazon is really the type of company we want to be investing in. I assume it's, within our investment policy and that sort of thing. But a good deal, but I just wonder if that's who we want to be supporting. And I just sort of throw that out there. Any kind of comment, if any. And then I have another question as well.
Jim, I didn't get which company were you talking about?
Amazon specifically. It just sort of jumped off the page at me, and just thought I'd throw out the question.
This is Joe Wire. Back to the...
Oh, I'm sorry, Joe. I was just going to ask Director Mastin to maybe, he's a little muffled. He's coming in a little muffled.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's a little difficult to hear you.
I'll move the phone a little closer if that helps. So, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I think Joe Wire heard you, but I just think the
Okay.
other directors might not have. So, Joe, could you go ahead and answer him?
Sure. I will just repeat what Director Mastin pointed out was that the district has presently in its portfolio an investment with the corporate entity Amazon. As right now the district's arrangement with PFM is a discretionary arrangement where PFM selects the investments based on their criteria that we have worked out, the board has worked out over the years with them. I think that as has been recently discussed at some of your meetings by Director Hill, that that there's interest in potentially looking at what types of investments the district has its investment manager invest in, whether it's a straight discretionary investment arrangement where they pick the investments, or it's one where we give them more prospective guidance, the board does. So in order to do that kind of review, that staff is absolutely willing and PFM is willing to do that. It would be at the request of the Finance Committee to request that the district take on that study, and then we would go do that and then bring back information to you. And it would be several months. In fact, I would urge us to wait until Leslie Murphy gets back in January to start that. But we could do it sooner if you want to. She did leave me a resource. They have an excellent resource that I can use if you guys have any interest in moving forward sooner.
Thank you for that answer and clarification. I don't think that it's necessary to jump on it immediately. So when Leslie gets back would be fine. The other question I have is I noticed in the OPEB Trust Fund report that PFM will be acquired wholly by U.S. Bank, but I didn't see any mention of that here, and I just wondered how that will affect our relationship with PFM and our rate structure, et cetera. And maybe that's a question better left to the OPEB discussion later on in the day.
Well, we do have the district has its own. The district has a relationship with PFM. In fact, it has two distinct relationships with PFM. One is for investment services for its fixed income portfolio, which we're discussing today at this meeting. Another one is for investment advisory services, in potentially that we the district entered an agreement with them several years ago for that umbrella service, and that would be looking at long-term debt relationships if one were actually needed by the district. And then the OPEB Trust Board has its own individual relationship with PFM, and that's for the investment of equities and fixed incomes in the OPEB Trust environment. So we will, at the OPEB Trust Board later today, we will discuss that relationship with PFM, that the sale of that. That we are understand and been told by PFM and been shared documents with PFM that it's a wholly owned purchase, and that all of the teams that we deal with today will be moving, well, not actually moving, but on paper moving over to being owned by U.S. Bank. So at this time, we are cautiously optimistic that the wonderful service that we received PFM for the last couple of decades will continue, and we as staff will be watching that to see that the people that which make up the key relationship here stay, and that the fees which you discussed remain as they are, and then we are assured that they have been so far. But we'll keep you informed if there were any changes.
If I may, Joe,
okay,
also,
thank you for that, Joe.
I believe there's a distinction also with the OPEB Trust Board, because while they have a relationship with PFM, they also have a relationship with U.S. Bank. And so I think it's important for it to be discussed at that venue because of the relationship with both, and now one company acquiring the other.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions of Joe on item number 3?
This is Bert.
Bert, go ahead.
I think the Finance Committee should have make a consideration on these issues of what our risk would be on some of these questions about supporting various organizations, and if there is less risk or if there is not. And in that sense, I think it's worth a discussion sometime within the Finance Committee. Thank you.
So I appreciate that. I was just going to say, I think before we give direction to staff on what I'm hearing is kind of that socially responsible investing policy, that it should be agendized, brought back to this body before a recommendation is made further. To give direction to staff at that particular point in time, I'm not sure the amount of time and commitment dollars that would be required to bring that forward. I know our own county went through this a couple different times. Incidentally, I couldn't help but think we have an Amazon distribution facility on the planning docket here in Sonoma County over in Sonoma, and the building was funded with or labor funds. So it's an interesting conundrum. but it's one worth talking about. I just want to make sure that we do it in a way that the full direction of the board or the committee is given to staff and it's agendized properly.
Agreed.
With that, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the discussion on this item. And before we take our vote, is anyone from the public wishing to speak on item number 3?
We have no speakers on this item.
Great, thank you. Can I have a motion on item 3 to ratify the previous investments, authorize investments, and accept the investment report?
I'll move item. I'll second.
All right.
All right, we have a motion and a second, and I think Madam Secretary did get that. If you can call the roll, please.
I did. We're voting on item number 3, and I'll start with Director Arnold. Is absent. Director Conroy. Is absent. Director Fredericks.
Yes.
Director Garbarino.
Yes.
Director Giudice. Is absent. Director Grossball. Is absent. Director Hernandez. Is absent. Director Hill.
Yes.
Director Maston.
Aye.
Director Melgar. Is absent. Director Rabbit.
Aye.
Director Rodoni.
Aye.
Director Snyder.
Aye. Aye.
Director Stephanie. Is absent. Second Vice President Cochran.
Yes.
First Vice President Theriault.
Yes.
And President Parr.
Yes.
Thank you. That's 10 ayes.
Great, thank you very much. We'll continue then to item number 4A, which is a matter presented by the Transportation Committee seeking budget concurrence relative to the installation of transit signal priority equipment on the Golden State Transit buses for the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency's Van Ness Bus Rapid Transit Project. That staff report begins on page 25, and we just heard the presentation from Ron Downing earlier this morning at the Transportation Committee meeting. If there are no further questions for staff, I'd like to continue. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns from directors on item 4A? I am not hearing any, and Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing?
Move the act.
Wonderful. I have a motion and a
Second.
I have a motion and a second, but Madam Secretary, is anyone from the public wishing to speak in this item?
I have no speakers for this item.
Great. With that, since we have a motion and a second to approve item 4C, can you please call the roll, please?
Sorry about that. That was 4A. So I'm going to start with Director Arnold. Absent. Director Conroy. Absent. Director Fredericks.
Yes.
Director Garbarino.
Yes.
Director Giudice. Absent. Director Grossball. Also absent. Director Hernandez is absent. Director Hill.
Yes.
Director Maston.
Aye.
Director Melgar is absent. Director Rabbit.
Aye.
Director Rodoni.
Aye.
Director Snyder.
Aye.
Director Stephanie is absent. Second Vice President Cochran.
Yes.
First Vice President Theriault.
Let them roll, yes.
And President Parr.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. You have 10 ayes.
Great. Nice to see that project finally finishing up. We'll move on then to agenda item number 6, since there are no actions under item 5. Agenda item 6 is the status report on the fiscal year 21-22 budget. That begins on page 27, and Joe Wire is here to present this report. Joe, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and to the committee as a whole. This is your monthly report on the status of balancing the FY 21-22 budget. And if I could have you turn to page 29, which is the familiar table we've been using to track that. This budget, as we are projecting, will be balanced with the use of both the district reducing some of its expenses and also with the ARPA funds from the first tranche that was received by the district several months ago. The only change to this report this time is that we're updating the actual, those appear on 3A, 3B, and 3C, the actual revenues from our operating businesses, the bus and ferry, and the bridge traffic. Bridge traffic continues to be a little bit above what we projected, and bus the same. Ferry is just about right on what we projected, so we're seeing a slight increase. That means that we will use slightly less of our freed up toll revenues. We call it the toll carryover from previous years, and that's the last line, line A on your table. So you can see in the bottom right hand corner, things remain zero, which means the budget remains a balance. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Joe. Are there any questions, comments, concerns from the directors on item 6? I'm not hearing any. And Dennis, I'm not sure if this is an appropriate spot, but it's worth noting, since there was mention of the ARPA funds, that MTC did meet, the Federal Transportation Authority did free up another $2.2 billion in additional ARPA funds that are going to be distributed sooner than later, but with the caveat that essentially that the existing ARPA funds are distributed. MTC distributed in 2 tranches. This includes that first tranche. The second tranche was supposed to come the end of the year or into January, and kind of seeing what the future held. That'll be accelerated now in order to make sure that we don't lose out on a portion of that 2.2, which staff, I believe, thinks it might be about 100 to 300 million, depending on how it gets formulated at the federal level, to the Bay Area. And obviously, hopefully, Golden Gate can be competitive to be able to receive those dollars. I believe that the way the formula was set out for the first tranche of dollars, it works fine for the bridge to receive the second tranche in that same formula. I do know that there was a few transit agencies that were not as happy. But Dennis, did I say anything that is incorrect?
No, you got it. We look forward to MTC allocating the second tranche, hopefully at their meeting on the 27th of this month. And if they allocate it per the methodology for the first tranche, we believe that that is fair and equitable because it deals with how much money you've lost. The intent of Congress is to give transit agencies funding to keep staff, to avoid layoffs, and to provide service. And we think it's consistent with that. The transit general managers are speaking among themselves. And so we hopefully will have a letter from the large transit operators and many of the small transit operators that'll go to MTC supporting a recommendation. And I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll pull that off.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think it's dollars are going to be moving a little quicker on that second tranche, and having an opportunity to receive another 100 to 300 million again is going to be a good thing for the Bay Area as a whole, and hopefully for the district specifically. So just thought I would mention that as Joe mentioned those dollars that came into budget this year. With that, I believe we're at the point where that concludes that discussion on the item. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on item number 6?
We do. We have one person from the public wishing to speak. Mr. Pilpel is on the line. David, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Perfect. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks. Okay. Last time today. So I was going to ask about the ARP second tranche fund allocation next week, but you've already discussed that, and thank you. I still think that a new district strategic financial plan is needed soon to avoid what I believe is a fiscal cliff due in about a year, perhaps 15 months from now. As transit service plans evolve, I still think that decisions will be needed on bridge tolls and bus and ferry fares going forward. And while bridge traffic and ferry ridership have improved at or above projections for this year, bus ridership and revenue have not. So I was noting that in the attachment to item 6. But that's all. And as usual, good work on the part of district staff in keeping the difficult budget in check. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that. I think what's true is we're still in uncharted waters, which is somewhat problematic when you run ferries. But as we maneuver through that, you're absolutely right. We're always looking over the horizon, trying to gauge when things will return back to quote unquote normal. So no action is required on this item. So moving on then to item number 7, we have a monthly review of the Golden Gate Bridge traffic tolls, bus and ferry transit patronage fares, and that's on page 37. Again, Mr. Wire is here to present the item, as well as 8A, which is the monthly statement of revenue and expenses. That's on page 49. And 8B, which is the monthly statement of capital programs and expenditures, and that's on page 59. Mr. Wire, can you go ahead and start?
Thank you very much, and I will do just that. First on the first report just starts on page 37. If we could turn to the familiar table on page 39, that discusses the first quarter's revenues and bridge, bus, and ferry patronage. And if you look at the boxes on the far right-hand side, those are the ones that have the bottom line numbers for revenue. Each box, there's 3 boxes, one on top of the other. Each one has the double solid lines at the bottom of each box contain in between them on the far right-hand side, the actual to budget number, which is for bridge example, is a plus 12.5%. What that tells you is that the actual revenues are 12% above what we thought the budget, and that corresponds directly to the money that we saw in the status report item that we just previously reviewed. And if you go down to those same numbers, below is the bus box, and below that is the ferry box. You can see that bus is slightly below, but it's at this point actually as close to budget as you would expect it, 2% below in revenue, and then ferry is above revenue by 60%. These are pretty wild fluctuations like that one in ferry, but it's because we're starting with such low numbers because service was expected to be and has been still much less than it used to be. What we have added to this report this month that we haven't had in the past was an answer to some questions that came up at your Finance Committee meeting last month, which was this data no longer contains any elements in it from the time before we had the pandemic, and that's because this set of data only covers a 2-year period, and now the pandemic has gone on so long that we're no longer showing the old data. So we've added some tables, and if you could take a look down to page 45, we've added some tables that, thanks to Jennifer Minucci's group, they've been putting together for staff for the last year and a half during the pandemic, but now we can share them with you and the public so you can kind of see the comparison. We've also used very similar ones in the budget. So if you can look at page 45, you can see the first ones. There's two graphs for bridge, 2 graphs for bus, and 2 graphs for ferry. And what they show is a graph of the traffic in bridge, or the patronage in bus and ferry, the ridership, and then the revenues. So if we just look at page 45, the top graph has 3 lines on it. In fact, each of them have 3 lines. The top line represents 2019. If you're looking at this on your computer, it's in color, it's blue. The middle line represents 2021, the year we're in right now. And the bottom line represents 2020. And the first graph at the top of the page is traffic, and the one at the bottom of the page is revenue. They look very similar, and they're not surprising. But you can see from the right, you can get a sense that each one sort of gives you a sense of where we are today compared to where we used to be 2 years earlier, and where we are last year. And you can see that in bridge traffic and in bridge revenue, this year is clearly better than last year, but it's still clearly worse than the year before. And that comes along with the data that you see. We're running about 80% to 82% of revenue that we used to receive prior to the pandemic in bridge. And so that gives you a quick visual sense of sort of where we are and where we used to be. And that was one of the questions that you had at your last set of meetings. If we turn to page 46, we can see the same arrangement for bus. And we have, again, the same two graphs, the top one for ridership, bottom one for revenues. Again, they look very similar. You can see that the top line in each graph represents 2019. The middle line represents 2021, and the bottom line represents 2020 during the worst of the pandemic. You can see both bus ridership and bus revenue is better than last year, but it's dramatically less than the year before. And it's much different than the relationship at Bridge, and you can get a feel for that the bus ridership has, although come back some, we're getting close to 30%. It's where it used to be. It's still 70% away from where it was, and that goes for both ridership and revenue. And then if you turn to page 47, you can see the same thing for ferry. And again, we have the same relationship where the year we're presently in, which is now the middle line on the chart, the one between the other two, it's a little bit better than the worst, but it's dramatically less than where it used to be back before we had this stay at home and the pandemic directions for people to stay at home. So we'll keep producing these graphs as we go forward and putting them in each month just to give people an ability to understand the relationship and where we are compared to where we used to be, but also to show that we are clearly getting better in each of these areas than where it was at the worst of the pandemic. And are there any questions on that? Otherwise, I would move on to the next report.
The only question I have, Joe, is that you said we're 82% of revenue for bridge, 30% for bus. Can I just ask you what that chart translates to for ferry as a percentage?
It's for ridership, it's been running about 12 to 15%.
Okay.
So in other words, we still have about 85 to 87 or 89% to go if we want to get back to where we used to be. Yeah.
Gotcha. Anyone have any questions, comments, or concerns for Joe on that item? Not hearing any. Why don't you move on, Joe?
Okay, next we go to page 49, and that is item 8A, and it's the financial statements for the month. And we'll just take a look at the cover page, but you folks are aware that behind that represents the line items for the consolidated budget and each of the divisions. If you have any questions on those, you can ask. But on the consolidated front, you can see that revenues are about $5 million more than we budgeted. That's primarily due to the fact that toll revenues come in a little bit higher than we expected. And they're $10 million better than last year. And that's the first set of numbers halfway down the page. The second set of numbers below that represent the consolidated district expenses. Expenses are about $7 million under budget, primarily due to the salaries, benefits, and professional services. And as you remember, we budgeted enough expense to allow the district to grow service when demand grew. And then, of course, the COVID variant hit, and demand has not grown. People have not gotten direction to go back to their offices in the city, so our commute service continues to lag. And lastly, the bottom set of numbers is consolidated revenues over expenses. Through the first quarter, the first 3 months, we were about $5.8 or $6 million short. In other words, revenues below expenses. That's better than we had budgeted and better than what we had last year, and that's due primarily to the increased revenue that we had from increased toll revenue. If there are any questions on operating expenses, if not, I would move on to capital.
Any questions for Joe? Not hearing any. Why don't you move on?
Okay, capital's on page 59, and we'll just do a short summary. It's just through the first quarter. It's capital projects which last over many years. 3 months does not tell you a whole lot about what's going on, but expenditures have been running about 18%. It varies depending on how funds have come in the various divisions, and you can see that on the chart, on the table on page 59, or the charts on the following pages. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
And again, any questions for Joe on that one? Not hearing any. I think that, and that's it for item 8, right, Joe?
Yes, it is.
Okay, Great. I appreciate that. Thanks for those presentations. That really concludes that item. So before we move on, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on items 7, 8A, or 8B, Madam Secretary?
We have no speakers for those 3 items.
Okay, great. Thank you. So no actions are required for those items, and we'll continue then to item 9, which is the first quarterly report of judgments or settled claims. That report can be found on page 65, and Attorney Madeline is on the line to present the report. Madeline, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and board members, this is an informational report. It reflects settled claims or judgments that occurred during the first quarter within the general manager's authority or otherwise previously authorized by the board. So if there are any questions, happy to try to answer them.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns from the directors on item number 9? Not hearing any. Madam Secretary, I don't think we have anyone from the public who would like to speak on this item. Just confirming.
Yes, that's correct. I have no speakers on this item.
Okay, great. That concludes the discussion on this item. Again, Madeline, thank you. No action is required for item number 9. So moving on then to items 10 and 11, which are the first quarterly report on authorized budget adjustments and budget transfers under the general manager's authority, as well as procurement actions under the general manager's authority. Item 10 starts on page 67 and item 11 on page 69 of the packet. Mr. Wire, can you go ahead and start that one?
Yes, as mentioned, both of these items represent the first quarter, which means there's very little activity, of course, on the budget adjustment one. There's just one very small change that was made. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer that one. And also, of course, any questions on the procurement item, which has about 25 actions that represents the activity that took place over the first quarter. So open the floor to any questions at this time.
And my fellow directors, any questions for Joe on those 2 items? Not seeing any. And again, Madam Secretary, I don't think there's anyone from the public. Just confirming.
That's correct. No speakers for this item as well.
Okay, that concludes discussion on those items. Again, no actions are required for items 10 and 11. And we checked for public, so just confirming. So we'll move on to item 12 on the agenda, which is the closed session. And before we do that, I want to thank everyone for being patient during today's meeting. Once again, we will be placing the public on hold for the duration of this item, and we'll reconnect the call after closed session. And Ms. Chun, please take us into closed session.
Yes, we will be now convening in closed session to discuss with the committee 3 items of existing litigation as noted on the agenda. So at this time, we'll convene in closed session, and Kim Manolius will be present to discuss these items.
Thank you. We're back in open session.
And Madeline, can you please provide your closed session report out?
Certainly. The committee convened in closed session as permitted by the Brown Act to review 3 matters involving workers' compensation claims, and the committee provided instructions for the future disposition of these matters. And that concludes the report.
Great, thank you very much. And Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to address this committee under item 13, public comment?
We have no further speakers for the committee.
All right, then that takes us to the end of the agenda. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
I'll second.
And a second.
I'll second.
And hearing no objections, that concludes the meeting of the Finance-Auditing Committee. Thank you, colleagues. It is 11:12 a.m.